Hi, everybody. Once again, my name is Nate Swick. I'm the digital communications person here at the ABA, and I'm excited to welcome all of you once more to our second virtual Bird Club meeting. This is the ABA's sort of answer to the problem of people not being able to go to their bird club meetings because we're all self-isolating and socially distancing as well as we can. So welcome once again to my guest bedroom. You can see here where we're hosting this virtual bird club meeting. Before we get started, there's a couple things I did want to say. The first is thank all of you so much who joined us for our last bird club meeting, the one 2 weeks ago with Nick Lund. We had a ton of people we had a ton of people that came to join the ABA after watching that meeting, and we're really excited that you did. So welcome to the ABA. We've got another cool discount. If you missed the chance 2 weeks ago, we have another discount I'm going to throw to you at the end of this program, so stay tuned for that. We'll have another membership discount. And second of all, I want to apologize for hosting this meeting on. Hold on, are we working here? I want to apologize for hosting this meeting on the first night of Passover. I should have known better. My wife was not very happy with me for that, but I hope to all of you who are celebrating, you'll be able to watch this later perhaps, and we will be more conscientious of when we schedule these sorts of events in the future. So, without too much further ado, people are saying, did we start yet? Part of it? No, we're good. We're good. Without too much further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker for this evening, Tessa Rhinehart. She is a researcher at the University of Pittsburgh. She does work on acoustic monitoring of birds. Welcome, Tessa, from your home in Pittsburgh. How are you doing?
Hey, Nate, I'm doing pretty well. Enjoying the sort of warmer weather from inside mostly, but yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Yeah.
I suppose this is the part of the bird club where we talk about what birds that people have seen recently. Have you seen anything good recently? Have you been able to get out or even just seen things from your windows?
Well, something that's been distracting me during my Zoom calls is there are a couple of blue jays that keep grabbing nesting material from the yard next door and slowly climbing the sycamore tree next to me. So that's been really fun to watch today.
Do you have any birds nesting under your eaves? I have a pair of house finches that no matter however I try to stop them, they come in underneath the front eaves, which seems like a terrible place to nest because they're constantly coming and going, and we're constantly coming and going. My kids are coming out the front door and scaring them away, but they manage to get one, maybe two clutches every year. It's pretty remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been able to watch anything like that?
Not recently. But definitely at my house in McKean County where I'm from.
Mm-hmm.
My parents have said that there's a phoebe that comes back every year that does the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm going to turn your audio up a little bit. I had my wife's friend send a picture of a phoebe nest that was nesting underneath their eave, and they wanted me to identify what it was, so that was pretty exciting. Mm-hmm. There's birds around, even if we can't always get out to see them. So what are you speaking to us about? What are you speaking about to us tonight, Tessa?
I am going to talk about the research that I do at the University of Pittsburgh. So I do automated acoustic monitoring of birds and other animals.
Fascinating.
And I wear a lot of hats, but the two big ones right now are that I'm a birder and a computational ecologist, to use the fancy word for that. I was originally going to give this presentation to my local bird club. Shout out to Three Rivers Bird Club.
Absolutely. Shout out to Three Rivers Bird Club at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
The best in the West, some might say. We're in Western Pennsylvania.
Western PA, that's right.
But that bird club was, of course, canceled, as a lot of other meetings have been. So I'm really excited to give this here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for allowing us to kind of keep this community, this birding community going. I know, like you, I have missed out on giving talks or even just going to my local bird club meetings. And it's nice to have something like this. It's nice that so many birds have volunteered to give these sorts of talks. So thank you for that, Tessa. And this is kind of a shout out to all the people out there. If you are a birder, if you give talks to bird clubs, please let us know. Drop me a line at podcast@aba.org or in swick@aba.org, and let me know if you're willing to do something like this. I'm eternally grateful to both Nick and Tessa, of course, for being sort of guinea pigs as we sort of feel our way through this new reality. But so Tessa, without any further ado, I'm going to throw your talk up on the screen and turn my mic off and let you do your thing. So please welcome. There's no round of applause. Imagine a virtual round of applause from the audience here. Tessa, welcome.
All right. So the way this is going to work is I'm actually on Skype with Nate right now, and he's controlling my slides. But I think he has detailed enough slide notes that he'll be able to control them on his own.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Today, I want to tell you about these automated avian surveys. They combine autonomous recorders with computer programs that automatically identify bird sounds. So if the slide is showing correctly, on the left, there's a picture of an autonomous recorder in a waterproof Ziploc baggie. Very high tech. You can leave it alone in the woods for months, and it'll record pretty much the same things that a birder would hear. Birds, insects, cars, planes, rain. And on the right is a picture of one of my coworkers setting up a sound analysis. She sets up the computer program, tells it what field recordings to listen to, and then the program will automatically identify what bird species are vocalizing in each recording. So in this talk, I want to first describe the motivation behind why we do this research, and second, I want to talk about how we actually go about running these automated surveys and how we create the technology that's used in them. So first, we'll jump right into the why. This background picture on the slide is an illustration of a dodo skeleton. Dodos went extinct in the 17th century, only 100 years after they were first discovered. So the short answer to why we want to eavesdrop on birds is we want to prevent other species from going the way of the dodo. In order to prevent extinctions, we need to collect a lot of information about birds, collect more data than we have at larger scales than ever before. In the history of the Earth, millions of years before humans came around, that life on Earth went through 5 mass extinctions. In each of these events, over 60% of the species on Earth went extinct. They were thought to be caused by things like meteors or geological events, and now evidence points to us being in the midst of a 6th mass extinction. There is a large percentage of all life on Earth that is at risk of being lost. Biodiversity is decreasing, as in the extinction rate is 100 times faster than it was before humans came around. To take birds for an example, you might have heard about an article that came out in the journal Science last year. It analyzed breeding bird survey data over the past 50 years and found that the population of breeding birds in North America has decreased by 2.9 billion individuals since the breeding bird survey began. Now, a loss in numbers isn't the same thing as extinction, but we're on the course toward it for a lot of species. The IUCN estimates that 1 out of every 8 bird species is at risk of extinction. To study this biodiversity loss, scientists generally want to do 3 things. They want to understand what the underlying factors are contributing to species decline. They want to predict future declines under different scenarios, like habitat loss or climate change. And finally, they want to prevent these declines before they happen using conservation action. To successfully do these things, we need to be able to survey the population size of a species at any given place and time. For instance, population monitoring could help us figure out how much habitat and what type of habitat a species needs during the breeding season. Then we can take conservation action to create that sort of habitat. Monitoring can also help us identify which species are the most at risk and understand how these species respond when we do take conservation actions or observe disturbances. All right, so why automated surveys? First of all, the fact is recorders can just collect a lot more data than people can. The kind of data we need to address these global problems. I have one of the recorders that we use here. I'll show it off later in the talk, but these recorders cost $50 each, plus however much my boss pays me to spend 30 minutes setting it up and strapping it to a tree. So $50, that's less than a day's wages of an average field technician in the United States. But once you've spent that $50, you can use that recorder to capture as much data as you want, probably thousands of hours over the life of a recorder. You can spend those hours, you can allocate them any way you want, whether that's surveying more places, more areas, surveying more hours a day, getting data from a larger number of seasons than the breeding season, which is typical, or it also allows you to use recorders for some specific purposes, like things humans aren't really suited to do on large scales. Not many people really want to sit in the same spot to wait for the first song of a newly arrived migrant, and good luck doing that at like every field site that you want to find the first arrival of every species of. You can also use recorders to find rare or infrequently vocalizing species, maybe those birds that are a bit more shy of humans, or survey for primarily nocturnal species. The second advantage of recorders is they can survey birds anywhere you put them. Anywhere you put the recorders, not the birds. They can perform surveys in places that are hard for humans to access, like mountains with difficult terrain, and they can also be used to survey remote places, for instance, places that citizen scientists wouldn't often visit. Recently, another sort of related challenge is that a lot of field seasons are being canceled or scaled back due to concerns about COVID-19. Non-local seasonal technicians, in some cases, aren't allowed to travel to their field jobs. I know of at least one time-sensitive project that was salvaged because the scientists running it had already put up some acoustic recorders before their in-person surveys were canceled. Another benefit that we think about all the time at the Kitts' lab is we also think of our acoustic recordings like museum specimens. They're similar because they act as a permanent record of a soundscape. That's all the things vocalizing or all the noises happening at a place at a certain time. We might be collecting recordings with a specific scientific question in mind, but 50 years down the road, someone's going to come along and ask a new question using our recordings or analyze them with new methods. Recorders also give you a permanent and verifiable record and are less variable than human surveyors. So before I talk about how we actually do these automated surveys, I just want to mention this work is not intended to replace field ornithologists. There are a lot of reasons for that. When people are in the field, they're not just counting birds. They're noticing other things, they're forming hypotheses, and I think their observations and their curiosity is really what drives science. Technology will never be able to replace that. Instead, the methods I'm talking about enable new types of research at bigger scales than direct observation can generate. So that brings me to the second part of my talk and the much longer part, the world of automated avian surveys. I don't know about you, but song is one of the things that really drew me to birds when I started becoming a birder. It also turns out to be a very effective way of detecting which species are in an area. Over 90% of bird species detected by humans during surveys are detected by sound. The upshot of this is that when we leave an acoustic recorder in a habitat, it will capture a snapshot of the biodiversity in the habitat, and it's pretty accurate. Our go-to recorder is called the Audio Moth. So I have number 5,000 labeled in this slide, but I also just recently labeled number 1,000. Or sorry, I have 500 labeled, and I just recently labeled 1,000. So that was exciting. Basically, all it is a circuit board, this green part, with a battery pack attached to it. This thing will record between 150 to 200 hours on one charge of its AA batteries. It has an omnidirectional microphone located right here, and omnidirectional means it picks up all of the sounds coming from all directions. The plans for this recorder are freely available online, so anyone can have them manufactured as long as you have the technical know-how to deal with the suppliers. And once you make a lot of these at once, they cost only about $35 each. They also require a little micro SD card for storage, and that's about 15 bucks. So that's how we get the estimate of $50 per recorder. Between our recorders and the ones we've given to collaborators, we've had about 2,800 of these recorders made. You can do the math on how much that cost. In the US, they're in places like Virginia, Washington, Montana, Pennsylvania, and they're even in some other countries like Panama and Borneo, surveying frogs in those two places. Because these things are so inexpensive, I think of them as an equalizer in the scientific community. They allow anyone with at least $50 to spare in their pocket to get into big data collection. Besides our lab, which has bought about 3,000 of these, like I said, at least 10,000 other ones have been manufactured and sold. Most of them purchased through group purchases. If anyone wants to know how to get one of these through group purchases, I can give that information after the talk, but the place to go is called Group Gets. So the process of deploying the recorder and doing the survey starts with deploying all the recorders and specifically picking a study site. Our very first big deployment was at Sprout.
Bear with us for a second. I think we lost Tessa there. We're going to try and get her in just a second. Tessa, you're back.
Oh, okay.
All right.
What did I miss?
You stopped at the first big deployment was at, and that's when we lost you. So continue from there.
The suspense. Okay. Sorry about that. We chose Sproul because there's a breeding bird survey route there. Did you say something, Nate? No.
I thought I lost you again, but you're back.
Okay. Sorry, I think my internet is a little in and out sometimes.
We will do the best we can.
So I'm sorry about that.
We will do the best we can.
Um, yeah, so the reason we put the recorders at this route is there's a breeding bird survey. Eventually, we'll be able to not only, learn things about Sproul State Forest using these recorders, but understand how our recorders compare to an expert human surveyor. I actually met the person who does these surveys when I gave this talk once. I was talking about Sproul and how there was a survey there, and he was like, "I do that survey." So it was really nice. He's a very nice guy. Yeah, we'll see how they stack up. So once we get to the study site, we strap the recorders onto trees. For waterproofing, they're in a very high-tech Ziploc baggie. The baggie is thin enough that it doesn't really stop the sound from getting to the recorder. So that's why we use baggies. But we're testing other forms of housing right now as well. On the slide, you can see we put a little note in the bag. The first time we deployed recorders at Sproul, some rumors started going around because people thought we were doing a sting operation on out-of-season hunting. So some recorders went missing or got shot. We found some disassembled on the ground as well. So we started putting notes in the bag that, reassure people we're bird nerds. We explain what the recorders do and invite people to email us with questions. The magic of the recorders happens after we walk away. Audio mods can be programmed to record as frequently as you want them to. So we typically program ours to record for 3 hours a day, every day, capturing the dawn chorus because that's when you get the highest density of species. The audio moths will record in the field for about 2 months at this rate, but if you record for fewer hours a day, they'll record for a longer number of months. At the end of 2 months, we bring the recorders back. They don't have access to the internet, so we actually have to physically go and pick them up and do the analysis after the fact, after the field season is done. Next, we take the recordings off of the recorder. This picture shows some of those micro SD cards. I removed these from recorders after a deployment and had to download all those recordings from the micro SD cards onto our computers. Finally, we process the recordings to automatically identify the sounds in them. This automatic sound identification is what I'm going to talk about next. Sound identification. Sound identifiers are also known as classifiers. They classify what species each song belongs to. We generically might call them models, so that's a word you'll hear me use a lot. This field has a ton of jargon, so hopefully I'll be able to take you through each of these vocabulary words. Anyway, one big part of my job is making these models, but I don't actually, sit at a computer and tell the model, here's how you tell the difference between a robin and a tanager. Instead, what we do at the Kids' lab is we set up a computer program that creates the model automatically. This process is called machine learning. Machine learning is all the buzz lately. You also might hear similar technologies referred to as artificial intelligence. The technology we use you can think of as similar to speech recognition that you have on your smartphone. So when you pick up your phone, you can ask it now, "Hey Siri, what's the weather?" Or "Give me directions home." And it recognizes your words, parses what they mean, and then gives you what you asked for. Now, instead of recognizing individual words, we want to be able to recognize the song that each species makes. For our methods, the first step is to translate audio into pictures called spectrograms. At the bottom of the slide is an example of a spectrogram made from a recording of a winter wren. Spectrograms are read a lot like music. Time is on the horizontal axis. The left of the image is earlier in the recording, the right is later in the recording. Frequency is on the vertical axis, so low sounds like owl hoots would be a lower frequency at the bottom of the axis, and high sounds like those blackpoll warblers that are coming here soon are at the top of the axis. Then the darkness on the spectrogram is the loudness of the sound. Now, we are going to try to play the song this spectrogram was generated from. The red bar on the left side of the spectrogram will scroll across the spectrogram as the song plays. Hopefully the audio track and the red bar will be synchronized over the live stream, but I apologize if not. I can make these recordings and spectrograms available afterward on YouTube or Twitter if anyone's interested. But first, let's try to take a listen to this recording.
I hope that worked. I suppose we'll find out soon if it didn't.
We're going to hope that worked and continue on. Anyway, a spectrogram is just another way of interpreting a bird sound. Each species spectrogram is unique in the same way that the sound that each species makes is unique. In fact, for people, it's sometimes easier to tell species apart using the spectrogram than it is by listening to the sound of the bird. For instance, red crossbill call types and nocturnal flight calls are often easier to identify on a spectrogram. On this slide, I have a red-breasted nuthatch, which is my favorite type of nuthatch, and a spectrogram of its sound. We'll again try to.
So it didn't work. I'm hearing from people it didn't work. So I'm gonna try something else here. I'm just gonna play it right into the microphone that I have here at home. So fingers crossed.
Okay.
Oh shoot! I gotta turn my phone back up. Bear with me. All right, I'm pretty sure that worked.
Thank you, Nate. Yeah, okay. I definitely heard it. So there are 8 calls in the recording that I was going to play, but you can see each call looks like a little ladder. The ladder is showing the overtones of the bird's calls. Each overtone is a rung on the ladder. And these overtones are what make the call sound nasal. Next, a cardinal song is a good contrast with the red-breasted nuthatch.
Give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's not exactly the spectrogram that you have up there, Tessa. I apologize. I'm just trying to pull something.
No, that's great. I mean, when I look at a spectrogram, no matter whether the cardinal is singing downwards or upwards, I can really easily tell it's a cardinal. They have these really long upwards or downwards frequency sweeps, and their tone is that beautiful, like almost laser gun-like clear sound, and that shows up on the spectrogram. it doesn't have the ladder-like appearance of the red-breasted nuthatch, which is one thing that helps you identify it's a cardinal. Our recordings from the field don't sound as perfect as the recordings that we just played. They have a lot of species in them, and they have a lot of background noise. Depending on where they're located, they could hear cars, they could hear people walking by, a stream. If it's raining, the rain pitter-patters against the microphone. Now we were going to play an example of a field recording, but we don't have to.
I have a strategy that I'm going to try. Hold on just 1 second.
Okay.
Did that work at all?
I definitely could hear something.
Yeah, I was trying to play it through my mic. Oh, I'm sorry, Tessa. I thought this would work. It doesn't sound like it's quite working. So please imagine all these songs playing in the background.
Yeah, if you want to hear a great example of a soundscape, or examples of bird songs, there are a couple of online databases you can go to that show the spectrograms. I think the best one for comparing the spectrogram and the bird sound as the sound happens is Macaulay Library, which is I think run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So definitely Google search Macaulay Library and look up some spectrograms. You'll start to see how the audio is translated into a picture. So you'll have to take my word for it, but that recording that we were going to play had a house wren, a blue-gray gnatcatcher, and a few other species in it. There's also an American bullfrog in the recording, fun fact. It's moving on. I don't think there are any more.
I could have tried to do my best impersonation of a bullfrog, but it's probably best if I don't. So I'll just leave that to your imagination.
I think it would be better if you did, but I respect if you don't want to do
Fair
that.
enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So no more recordings. I'd be happy to post these original recordings or some other examples to my Twitter account when we're done here. But for now, onwards. Our goal is to make a model for sound identification that can replicate what a birder can do when we hear that recording. It should be able to take the recording or the spectrogram and then create from that a list of what species were in the recording. Alternatively, in addition to classifying each sound, we can even put time and frequency boundaries around each sound to show exactly where in the spectrogram each song is. This could allow us to get the number of vocalizations in a recording, or there are a few other sort of specific purposes for that I could talk about later. But right now our lab doesn't use a lot of models that work like this. We mostly use ones that work like the previous slide showed, where it just produces a list of species in the recording. But for this presentation, I'm going to keep using this picture because it makes the machine learning easier to explain. Now, the crucial question is, how does the machine learning work? How are we creating a sound identifier, a computer program, a model, whatever you want to call it, that can identify birds? The answer is similar to how you or I, as birders, might teach ourselves, by trial and error. The type of model we use is called a neural network. I'll explain where the trial and error comes in a little bit later, but neural networks are called that because the way they work is sort of analogous to how neurons work. The neuron network starts with each neuron receiving some information about the spectrogram image, and then each neuron applies a mathematical equation to that information and passes the result on to the next neuron. Basically, a model of sound identification is just a really specific series of equations applied to the pixels of a spectrogram. The particular type of neural network we use is called a convolutional neural network. You don't really need to know what that means, but the key is that convolutional neural networks are common for image analysis. They're great at picking up patterns in pictures, and they're often used for things like identifying a cat face in a picture or doing handwriting recognition, because they're great at picking up things like edges, lines, and dots, and then combining them to get a more realistic picture of what the features of the image are. The key to the process of machine learning, that trial and error, is, I lost a headphone here, give me a second. The key to the process is we make a computer program that's separate from the model, but sort of acts as a tutor to the model. The computer program can adjust the equations that the model uses to interpret the image. It makes those adjustments using a data set of sounds where all the species present in each recording have been identified. So here's an example of those identifications. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see the identifications really well, but what this shows is a bunch of boxes around the vocalizations on this image, and each one has the species identification written above it. Now, when we do the machine learning, the labels and boxes aren't actually drawn on the image. They're just contained in a separate spreadsheet. That's a common confusion. I can understand why, because that's what I'm showing you. But labeled data can be generated in two ways. Generally, there are also some other little tricks you can try, but the first way is a birder can sit down, listen to the recordings, and write down everything they hear. The second way is we can make simulated soundscapes. A simulated soundscape is when we download a nice, clean-looking recording, pretty much noise-free, hopefully only contains a single species. And we can get these recordings from databases like Xenocanto. For instance, the nuthatch and the cardinal were very clear recordings, and the spectrograms that I had on the PowerPoint were actually generated from Xenocanto recordings. So once we have the clean Xenocanto recordings, we overlay them and create something that looks and sounds a lot like a natural soundscape does. And we have a good idea of what species are in that soundscape because of the labels provided by Xenocanto. Now, at first, we don't just give the program the labels. That would be too easy. First, we hide the labels, and we just give the computer program a spectrogram. Then the model has to predict or take a guess at what species are in the recording. In the machine learning world, that is referred to as predictions. At first, the model is going to be terrible at predicting the species that are there. It doesn't know any better. You have to forgive it. There are some majorly awful guesses that I've written on this spectrogram, including an albatross. this wasn't actually generated from a real machine learning model. It's more an example, but I wouldn't be surprised if a model we created came up with something crazy like that on the first try. The next step is to use the true labels for the recording and figure out what predictions were wrong, what predictions were right, and penalize the predictions that were wrong. So let's take a closer look at how we compare the actual predictions from the labeled data to the actual labels from the labeled data to the predicted labels that the first run of the machine learning model created. This program identified a TOE correctly by pure chance. Two of its sounds are boxed correctly but misidentified as a cardinal and an albatross. In one case, the program boxed a totally blank part of the spectrogram and called it a crow. And some vocalizations aren't boxed at all, like the blue-gray gnatcatcher, sort of rough-looking sound at the top of the recording. The point of this is to say the first predictions are always going to be a mess. Now the computer has to learn from its mistakes. It gets better at identifying recordings by changing how it responds to certain features of a spectrogram. For instance, let's say the computer modifies its guesses so it doesn't label areas of the spectrogram that have low contrast. So the result of that is that when the model stops doing that low contrast labeling, the crow guess is gone. The computer program uses calculus to identify how to update the model and the equations used in the model so that its guesses are less wrong, hopefully more correct. This updating process is called backpropagation, and it's why machine learning and these neural networks work so well. So after the guessing algorithm is modified, the computer program goes through the whole process again. It makes a guess or a series of guesses, it's penalized, and it learns from its mistakes. This process happens with a lot of recordings, not just one spectrogram, and it has shown different spectrograms throughout different rounds of learning. Ultimately, the guessing algorithm that the neural network is composed of is able to pick out more meaningful features of the image. Eventually, after many rounds of guessing and checking and changing, the algorithm gets pretty good at it. It's probably not as good as a birder is, at least not yet. But the program can also tell us how sure it is about its guesses. So, for instance, we can choose to only use the recordings it's really certain about, or we can choose to use something called propagation of uncertainty, where for any analysis we do, the confidence we have in the conclusions of the analysis, like, for instance, let's say we're trying to understand how habitat fragmentation affects magnolia warblers. We could be less certain about the effects that it has if our machine learning was less certain that a magnolia warbler was or wasn't there at each field site. And that's the process in a nutshell. All right, I used this confused goose picture before, but I think it's cute. So I'm bringing it back to ask another common question. Does the machine learning process actually work? I have a funny story about this. A year ago, I was at a conference presenting these ideas. They were not really a reality yet. We were still trying to figure out how to make this machine learning work. And someone came up to me and she said, well, does it work? And immediately I replied, no, it doesn't work. But we've learned a lot in the past year, and now I'm really amazed and happy to say that we've made something that works very well. You don't have to trust me on this either. Let me give you some information so you can decide for yourself and understand what goes into analyzing how well a model works. In general, there are two ways that a model can be wrong. A species can be absent in a recording, but the model guesses that it's present. That mistake is called a false positive, and it's highlighted in red in this table. A species could also be present, but the model thinks it's not there, and that's called a false negative. It's highlighted in orange on the table. I'm sorry for putting an equation or two equations on this slide, but I'll explain what they mean. There are lots of ways to measure, based on these types of mistakes, how a model performs. One thing that we care a lot about, or two things we care a lot about, are the model's precision and its recall. Precision is the answer to the question, when the model says a bird is there, what percentage of the time is the model correct? Basically, this is the Stringer quotient. How much can we trust the model not to report false sightings? Recall, on the other hand, answers the question, when a bird calls in the recording, what percentage of the time does the model find it and say it's there? As you can imagine, there's a trade-off between precision and recall. A model that doesn't report many false sightings, so like isn't a stringer, also probably misses more true sightings because it's less confident about those sightings. It only reports the things it's more certain about. Alternatively, if a model catches all the sounds a species makes, always calling them out, pointing them out, it's probably also likely to make some false identifications along the way. I've been on both sides of this as a human birder. Hopefully I'm balancing my precision and recall out when I'm actually out there in the field. So here are the precision and recall numbers for one model that our collaborator Meow made recently. This model identifies 23 species that are common in the northeastern United States, and it's tested on real field data from automated recorders. When I was looking at this model and deciding which sightings to consider present or absent using a process called thresholding, and I emphasized precision in the model, I found that the model is able to get songs right 96% of the time, whereas it only identifies 1 out of every 4 songs. In general, for things like songbird surveys, you want to emphasize that precision. You don't want to report any species that aren't actually there. And it's okay if you miss a few calls because you have several thousand recorders. That bird is probably going to call more than 4 times in a recording, so on average, you should capture it. You can also change the model, though, to place a greater emphasis on recall. For instance, if you're surveying for a rare species, you want your recall to be high. You don't want to miss any sounds that even if it means you make a few false alarms. The way you deal with those false alarms is you have a human manually check over the model's predictions to remove the false positives. So what the machine learning model acts like in that case is a filter to show you the things that are most likely the rare species. So I would say this model works. It's one of many models we've made for various purposes that works surprisingly well. And not only is it successful, it can also be adjusted to suit whatever purposes you're using it for. Yeah, as you can imagine, this work is pretty challenging. We're on the frontiers of research. There's a lot of things that we try that just don't work. But I think the work will make a big difference in how well we can deal with the large-scale problems we're facing today, like climate change and habitat loss. Our goal with the research is to work out the kinks in the process and then make these methods accessible to ecologists, ornithologists, conservationists, so that everyone can use them and we can scale up our data collection and research. Hopefully, with automated surveys, we can better listen to the things that birds have to tell us. And that's about all I have for my talk. If you like this talk or you want to learn more, such as learning a little bit more about that process of balancing precision and recall that I mentioned, the ABA's Birding magazine just ran an article that I wrote about this work in its April issue. They're making that article available online for free. Actually, it is already online, I've heard.
That is correct. It is at aba.org/VBC Virtual Bird Club. You can see Tessa's article there for free. You can learn more. It's great. Or you can wait for your birding magazine. Either one, whichever one you want.
Yeah, so in that article, you're going to be able to read about a few things that I didn't talk about here. To close, a few thanks are in order. I want to thank my coworkers. First and foremost, they are a pleasure to work with, and the work I've presented here is absolutely a team effort. Everyone on the team has unique expertise and interest and passion that make the project possible. So I've listed some of the past and present folks who worked or are working on this project. I also want to thank our collaborators, our sources of financial support. I want to thank the ABA, Nate, Ted Floyd, everyone who made this possible. A few other thanks. There are many thanks to give. All of the photos in this presentation that weren't mine were Creative Commons photos. So a big shout out to those photographers who make their work available for purposes like these. Really appreciate it. Makes the presentation look a lot nicer. And last, and very importantly, I want to give a shout out to citizen scientists. Right now, a lot of the data that the lab uses to train our models comes from Xenocanto. It's a crowdsourced repository of bird sounds, and it's proven really useful for our work. So if you like to record birds, please consider participating in Xenocanto or in other citizen science projects like eBird, which lets you upload recordings and explore other people's recordings. These projects really do make a big difference, and we're very grateful for everyone who participates in them. All right, with that, I think I'm going to be able to take questions somehow, or maybe
absolutely.
Nate will help me out.
So we have some questions, some comments, lots of plaudits. Well done, Tessa. Great presentation. Really enjoyed it. The hard part is over, and by the hard part, I mean switching from slide to slide while you were talking. Obviously, that was the most difficult part of this whole thing. So how broad a scale can you do these? Could you take these recordings and put them in a place where there are hundreds of bird vocalizations or birds that don't vocalize that much, like say in the Amazon rainforest?
Yeah, I would say the only limit to this technology is how many example recordings we have of each
Right.
bird species.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, please leave them in the comments on Facebook or on YouTube where we're keeping track of that. And I did promise an ABA discounted code for membership. If you enjoyed this sort of presentation or any of the things that the ABA does while we're trying to all kind of deal with this COVID-19 thing, you can go to aba.org/join and you can, hold on, I got a thing here. You can go to aba.org/join and you can enter the code VBC10. It's over here. And you can get $10 off an ABA membership as a thank you for joining us here for these ABA Virtual Bird Club meetings. Did you? So I imagine that the COVID-19 emergency has made this sort of research that you guys are doing all the more important now that there are so many opportunities. There are fewer opportunities for birders to get out in the field and actually do some of this work in person. Was that just sort of a fortunate? Are people more interested in this work that you're doing now because of this potentially lost field season?
Actually, yes, surprisingly.
Yeah.
We know of at least one project where their entire field season has been canceled, or at least their in-person surveys.
Right.
And they're considering using our recorders, which I currently have in my house. Way too many recorders. So,
piled up in
I'm
the corners in the back.
I'm excited to hand those over. Yeah.
Yeah.
Other than that, other instances have sort of been lucky that someone happened to put up 60 recorders at sites they were also planning to survey in person.
Mm-hmm.
And then their university canceled their field research. So now that data is going to save the project for this year. And in some cases, it's irreplaceable. Like,
yeah, totally.
I'm happy for those folks. I hope that everything works out.
We have an interesting question from Chris Lundberg on Facebook. What about vocal mimicry? Like blue jay versus red-shouldered hawk. Is it good at picking those out?
That's an awesome question. It really depends a lot on how much you focus on teaching the machine learning. Blue jay versus red-shouldered hawk. I'm actually not familiar with how different their spectrograms are. If there is a difference, we worked with some species that have extremely similar vocalizations, and we've found it is able to pick them up to some degree. In another case, mockingbirds, for instance, there are things you can add to the model so that it recognizes that an amount of repetition is unusual. So the model actually understands the temporal aspect of like a mockingbird repeating a song many times.
Oh, that's really interesting. Guy Babineau asks, what are the hardest types of calls and songs for the algorithm to learn?
Anything that is low information content. Basically, your chips, nocturnal flight calls can be pretty tough, but they're also very well studied. So there's a balance between low information calls being hard to identify, but the more field data you give a model, the better it's able to distinguish those calls.
Oh, that's really interesting. I have a cool question from YouTube that I'm watching over on this other screen. Chris Spurgeon asks, systems that analyze human speech like Siri analyze the audio directly without the intermediate step of turning it into a spectrogram. So why did you decide to go with the image?
The reason is, why did we decide to go with the image? That's basically how everyone does it. So for voice, my phone's ringing. I'm just going to put it on the ground.
So your texts are blowing up telling you did a great job on the Virtual Bird Club.
My family's probably so proud of me right now. Anyway, Siri. So this birdsong identification is similar to problems in music identification, where people try to say what instruments are playing and separate them in a recording into two different instruments. So people who have done music recognition find that the spectrograms work better, and it's basically not worth doing it on the audio.
Interesting. If two birds of the same species are vocalizing at the same time, can you identify those two birds? Question from Joe Bennett on Facebook.
Awesome question. This is why you have to have, well, the answer is yes to an extent. You have to train the model to be able to identify overlapping sounds. So when we simulate spectrograms and place recordings on top of each other, that gives the model more of a challenge. So it has to be able to distinguish what it is about a sound that is specifically catbird-like or phoebe-like. If sounds are overlapping each other in time but not in frequency, like maybe there's a blackpoll warbler up high and an owl hooting down low. Those are the examples I used earlier. The machine learning is going to have a pretty easy time of telling those apart because they're not actually overlapping each other on the picture. Mm-hmm. But when there's like a towhee calling at the same time as a house wren, it can be hard to see one of the species. So usually the louder one wins out, and the model would only identify the louder one.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'll take a couple more questions. I know that we're kind of skipping over some people. Tessa, if you have time, I know we've taken up quite a bit of your time today. If you want to jump back into the link here on Facebook at some point in the next whenever and like answer some questions that I'm missing, I'm sure the people that are watching would really appreciate that. But you know, we won't be able to get through all of them tonight. But I do want to do a couple more. One that I thought was pretty interesting from Robert Mulhill. Can this be used to identify individual differences in songs, like a territorial boundary between two species, if the grid was sort of appropriately sized?
Absolutely. Again, you have to have training data, though. Mm-hmm. So this means, in practice, you're color banding some individuals, you're taking recordings of them singing, and you're then using the machine learning to identify which individual is singing. Now, there are some methods of machine learning called unsupervised learning that require varying degrees of labeled data. So it's also probably possible to use unsupervised learning on a problem like this too. For instance, you could say, there are 4 males in these recordings. I want you to find the divisions between the recordings that separate them into 4 males. But another interesting aspect of finding territorial boundaries that is not as much sort of related to the sound identification is you can actually localize a sound producing animal by setting up an array of time synchronized microphones. So then the bird vocalizes and its sound takes some time to travel to the microphones. And by calculating the time difference of arrival of the sound at each microphone, you can actually pinpoint where that bird was singing. So over time, that would be a good way to figure out the territorial boundaries if you had set up sort of a grid of recorders, and people have done that before with pretty good success, I think.
All right, I'm going to take one more question before I let you go. Once again, I want to remind people that if you want to join the ABA, we're offering a deal. You can go to aba.org/join and enter the VBC 10 code here, and you get $10 off a membership if you enjoy these sorts of things that we're trying to do while we're all stuck at home, self-isolating and not birding together. So I have one more question. It's sort of the $1 million question. I'm glad someone asked it of William Kurtz on the YouTube channel. Could your models be used in a phone app in the future that birders could use to identify bird songs in real time?
Okay, so we have a whiteboard at work that's the app request tally. And
here's one more. Plus one.
Whoever gets the most app requests is winning on the whiteboard. These models could be used to create an app, but that's not really what our lab is focusing on. We're focusing more on making them for ecologists, because we don't really have the skills or the funding to do things that are more citizen science facing.
You gotta chase that VC funding, Tessa. That's where all the money is.
Yeah.
Once again, before we say goodnight, I want to thank everybody who stopped by to watch our virtual bird club. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Tessa, for agreeing to do this for us. What a fascinating talk. What a great... I know that the Three Rivers Bird Club was sorry to miss you, but their loss is our gain. We actually came out... we did great on that. So thank you so much, and we will probably be doing this again in another couple weeks. I've got a couple more people raring to go to give these talks. Once more, thank you all for coming by. Be safe, be healthy. Thank you again, Tessa. Be safe, be healthy to you as well. Thanks to everybody. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Thank you.